Hello, welcome back to the series on karma, destiny and choice. Today we will be looking at a subject close to the hearts of many, entitled Why is there human suffering? And I welcome Sister Denise back to the studio.
Thank you.
Okay, this is a question that has plagued many for a number of centuries as to what causes human beings to suffer. And specifically a question that I've mentioned a few episodes earlier. Many ask, why do good people suffer?
If you look at the religions of the East, Buddhism and Hinduism, their answer to that is desire. Desire is the cause of human suffering. And if you look at the religions, the Abrahamic religions, they tend to say that human suffering is to do with justice, it's to do with, it's up to God. You know, it's God who lets you have happiness or lets you have sorrow, because they don't take into consideration the idea of karma. But karma you find very strong in Buddhism and in Hinduism. The Buddha is famous for having spent 40 days under the Bodhi tree trying to answer this question. And his enlightenment came with the idea of desire. And then his whole religion is all about curbing desires. And in Hinduism you have the very famous shlokas from the Gita, which talk about attachment, attraction, anger, loss of understanding, and suffering, all because of materialism and attraction to the objects of sense perception and the senses themselves. And so most of the religions, which are the ones who talk about this, go for transcending the human appetites. When you go outside the realm of religion and you think about a more philosophical approach to it, then people talk about being responsible. And if you're responsible, again, they talk about curbing the appetites and overcoming greed and this kind of thing. But definitely human suffering is always connected with some kind of abuse and some kind of excess. Then you get human suffering. Basically the answer that most people proffer is you bring it on yourself.
I have to ask you this question in this context. Is there such a thing as a victim?
You hear about victims and perpetrators. I think in the context of the world we live in, people are definitely divided up into victims and perpetrators. Eleanor Roosevelt had famously said that you are a victim if you allow it, but you have to be strong in order to not allow it. So I think that there are many people who become victims because their position is weak, their social situation is weak, their financial situation is weak, their mentality is weak. So a victim is definitely connected with being weak. Usually it is more powerful people who victimize weaker people, and so it's definitely an unequal playing field. But at the same time, the more you understand about karma, and the more you understand about what your capacity is and what your rights are, the less you will be pushed into a victim situation, a victim role. And people talk about victims and victimization more and more now. So anyone who understands about that has the possibility to come out of it. But there are many social systems which prepare people to be victims. If they're women, if they're poor, if they're undereducated, they are, it's a preparation for being made into a victim. So the society we have favors a victim-perpetrator setup, but now more and more people are thinking about how we need to be away from that.
If there's somebody listening to you right now who is suffering as a result of life and circumstance. What is your message to them?
I make a distinction between pain and suffering, and I position it like this, that pain is mandatory. There will be pain. This is that time of the historical period that we're in where there is definitely a lot of pain to be had, but suffering is optional. How you handle your pain, how you take the negative things that happen to you is actually up to you. The more you are internally strong, spiritually strong, the more you can handle pain, the less you will suffer. People who are weak, people who don't know anything, they suffer very easily and they suffer a lot. We have a lot more power over this than we may realize.
The human condition has become such that once someone's facing negative karma in any way, pain or suffering in any way, they succumb to it almost. When you're in that position, it's very difficult to know that you have a choice not to be.
I think this is why you have to prepare yourself in advance. You see, I'm involved in a spiritual practice which I've been involved in for decades, and so since my early 20s I've been preparing myself to be able to manage many things that occur in life. And the study and practice of Raj Yoga is all about preparing yourself for this type of thing, and ultimately preparing yourself for death. Many people, death is the last thing that happens after a long period of suffering. It could be physical, mental, social, financial, whatever. If you practice and you study over a long period of time and you gain experience and expertise, then you're in a much better position to manage whatever comes down the road for you, because you don't need much power to handle the pleasures of life, but it's the difficulties that require power to manage.
When you speak of your spiritual practice, you refer to understanding of life, or is there more to it than that?
It's a study theoretically and day to day. You're really looking at your own karma. You need to absorb strength, power from God. You need to consolidate that. You need lots of experience of different kinds of situations that occur so that you can understand your habit patterns, your sanskaras, your tendencies. You need to understand where you're strong, where your weaknesses are. It's very much oriented towards really understanding yourself and taking responsibility for what you're doing, and consequently also for what happens to you. So you learn to stay away from blaming and pointing the finger and all this type of thing. But whatever is happening to me, I have brought it on myself. So I have the power to shift my situation.
I'd like to go back to what you just said. You said in spirituality, there's no blaming or pointing a finger. That's what most human beings do, especially if you suffered at the hands of another. Take us through that.
Well, you suffered at the hands of another and you see that moment of suffering, but you're not taking into consideration that this may be a settlement of karmic account itself. So that other might well have suffered just as much at your hands, and as a equalizing that's taking place. When you're in this kind of spiritual practice and some negative thing happens to you, you can look at it in two ways. Either you're settling an account and it's getting balanced, so settle it, accept it, okay, it's getting balanced. Or you can consider it as a test. You know, maybe you didn't do anything bad, but you need to be raised to the next level. And this test is an instrument to get you to the next level. So either way is positive. And so nothing to point the finger or blame about, because you're taking benefit from it.
When someone is faced with a negative situation, pain or trauma or suffering in any way, a whole host of dark emotions emerge. Not just pain and suffering, but secondary emotions like anger, rage, aggression, etc. And it's even now known in the medical world that PTSD has a physical element. It actually leaves damage to the brain. So how does one deal with that? With, the handling all of that? Because the settlement of karma or any negative situation is a lot, and it comes in such a way that it can potentially break you and destroy you.
Oh yes.
And it does succeed with many.
Oh, it does. And this is why the subject is of paramount importance, because most people are liable to be broken. Most people are insufficiently strong to handle what's coming or what's already here. So one thing we can say is bear this in mind and understand that there are some things that you can do to make yourself strong so that you can manage these things, but you need to give it time and attention to accumulate that. You can't just become strong in 1 second. Secondly, you need to understand things in a different way from how you traditionally understand them, because the traditional way is to blame and to say this is injustice, or to say that this is not fair, or why, and to weep and wail. And even knowing these things, there are still many people who will do that. But I think it's just important for people to know that you don't have to handle it that way. You can look at it differently. You can turn it around in your mind. Even you were talking about PTSD leaving traces in the brain. But this is because people don't know how to not take it in. They don't know how to be detached from it. And to be detached from a shock that comes suddenly and unexpectedly requires a lot of skill. It's a little bit like martial arts. So the martial arts person has trained for a long, long time, and so it's second nature to take care of themselves. But someone who doesn't know, they haven't developed, so they will get struck, and they will get struck deep. All we can do, and we've been saying this for many, many years, is bear in mind these things, look at this in a different way, and prepare yourself, strengthen yourself, because there are many things that are likely to happen which are very, very stressful. There are many things in the world that are breaking down. With climate change comes extreme weather events, which can be very traumatic. We have wars, more and more wars happening. You can be in the crossfire. This is very traumatic. You may find yourself as a refugee, very traumatic. The healthcare system breaks down. You don't get the help you need, very traumatic. Family systems are breaking down. The economy is breaking down. So, it's happening all around us, so we need to be aware that sooner or later something's going to come and hit us, and maybe several times, so that the more equipped we are to manage it and handle it, the better off we are. And if we know about this and we don't do anything about it, we don't really have anyone else to blame except ourselves, that, oh, I didn't bother.
What I gathered from what you just said is that as a yogi, you live your life completely different to the way somebody who doesn't practice Raja Yoga meditation lives. You are stocking up, aren't you?
Yes.
Okay, so on a daily basis, you practice meditation, and by that you accumulate spiritual power, and you also study the spiritual knowledge, and you do this so then when life's negativity hits, you use what you built up to take it head on.
And there's one further thing that I do, and that is use opportunities that come to perform positive karma or pure karma, because that's also an accumulation. So you have three kinds of accumulation: the study, the karma, and the meditation.
Sorry, you have three types of accumulation.
Yes.
You need to elaborate on that, please.
Okay, when you meditate, you're accumulating power. When you study, you're accumulating deeper knowledge, deeper wisdom. That's also power. And when you do pure karma, you're accumulating karmic credit. Say you have a lot of karmic credit through these ways, and then some karmic debt comes, you can easily pay it because you're wealthy in those three areas. Someone who hasn't done anything like this, the debt can be so overwhelming they can't manage it. So this is a very, very good insurance for yourself.
The impression that I get is that you do not leave yourself at the mercy of life. You take precautions.
Yes.
Okay, that is an unusual way to live and a very wise way of living.
Well, it's a matter of looking at the circumstances and seeing that if you don't take precautions, you put yourself at risk much more than you need to. So I think it's a kind of common sense, you know.
But common sense is not common, is it?
No, unfortunately not.
Okay, you know, there are a number of people who practice something called positive thinking, and they hope and they send out a message that only good fortune will come to me. But your approach is totally different, isn't it? You hope for the best, but you prepare for the worst.
In many ways, yeah. Because you see, you have positive thinking, that's very good, excellent, nothing wrong with it. But it doesn't take into consideration the debts that you may have. You're assuming that you start with a white sheet of paper and you want to make some positive things happen. But I'm not doing that. I'm assuming that there's plenty of debts around. I don't necessarily know them, but they're there. So I have to prepare for them coming up, you know. And so different people handle these things in different ways, but I like this way because I find it very realistic and is really taking into consideration a very big picture. You know, earlier we were talking about a very big picture. In the big picture of you in a cycle of multiple lives where all kinds of things have happened that you don't remember, you don't know. You think of yourself as an ancient soul who's passed through all of history, and you don't know what you've done, you don't know what other people have done to you, but you know that there is something. You make yourself adequately prepared to manage that.
I'm wondering how fear plays into all of this. Because when a soul experiences extreme suffering, one of their greatest fears is that this is going to happen again. And fear is a debilitating condition for the human soul. How do you deal with fear in the context of the suffering of karma?
In the face of fear, you could take a step of courage or you could take a step of cowardice. And so if you really know yourself, believe in yourself, trust yourself, and you have a connection with God, the divine, it doesn't really look very good to take a step of cowardice. But taking a step of courage is like a risk, but it's a risk that you calculate knowing that, well, I have a good relationship with God, God will be there with me, and whatever comes, I will manage it, you know. You always do your best. It may not be good enough, but at least you face it, you know, you don't turn and run the other way. This is a good sign of a good soul.
Sister Denise, there are people who, as a result of their karmic burdens, are completely shattered. There's no other way to describe them. If someone's totally devastated by their own karmic burden, is there a way to come back? Can one restore oneself to one's former, I'm not going to use the word glory, but just a sense of dignity, a new normal?
I think it is technically possible, because all you have to do is just surrender yourself in front of God to get an incredible amount of relief and help. But then you have to start from the ground upwards, building your life again. Because usually people are in that bad condition because of inappropriate behavior, bad choices, addiction, things like this. Of course, the majority of people who are devastated to that extent never climb back up again, but it doesn't mean it's not possible.
Why is it so difficult for anyone to understand? My suffering means that I created this account. Why is that so hard to grasp and hold in your mind when the pain recurs again and again?
It is so difficult because it's an ego crusher.
And the ego does not die willingly.
No. You would rather anything than admit that you messed up.
Sure.
You know. This is ego. And very few people are ready to drop that ego. But it's necessary. I mean, spiritual practice means destruction of ego. So when you enter into a spiritual practice, it's with that understanding that my ego will be destroyed, but I will come through well.
Are you saying ego perpetuates suffering?
Ego definitely perpetuates suffering, yeah.
What comes to mind is the number of people I've dealt with in my professional life. There are a number of individuals who had to have settled an account a decade ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, etc., but who still haven't recovered from it. Despite having settled the account, there's still the mental element left. What would you say to them?
I would say that you need to turn again and again and again. Turn yourself toward God in all humility and say, I put myself in your hands. And just again and again set aside that ego. Because people have ego even if they have virtually nothing, but they'll cling to that thing. Yet it is the very thing that causes them to fall into a big black hole, you know.
Mm.
And they don't understand it, but the ego is has such a grip on them that they just cannot, will not, under any circumstances. You know, ego death is like actual death. So people are scared of death. And they're scared of dropping their ego because their whole identity is tied up with it.
Oof, that was a lot. But thank you. Thank you. An extremely informative half an hour. So thank you for lending us your ear for this half an hour. There you go, the subject of why do we suffer, something that sits deeply with most of you listening to today's episode. And I do hope that you have received Sister Denise's message, which is simply to open your heart to God. And that is the only way in which we can become assured of a life without karmic suffering. Thank you so much, Sister Denise, and thank you, Atom, for joining us. Take care and goodbye.